Okay, well, thanks again so much for joining us, Andrew. It's great to kind of have this conversation again. I guess today we're looking at something that we feel like Forestbrook has done a really strong job on, but we still have a lot more to learn about. And I think this is something that we can only continue to improve on, and it's the idea of forging meaningful intergenerational relationships. And I love the way he describes what it means to be a church that has these as a value. And he explains it this way, that building these relationships, these meaningful relationships, means being devoted to fellow believers who we want to be around and become. And certainly I think that that's such a good challenge for us, because it really puts a lot of emphasis and onus on us to realize that we do have something to give, because as we follow after Jesus, that we're being made into something and that we do have something to offer. So I love that working definition that he puts out. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I really like the definition too. I think anytime you use definitions, it can kind of bring some form of clarity to them. And I like the two things he highlights in that definition of both you want to be around those people and you want to become like them. So those are sort of the two key tenets of a meaningful relationship.
Mhm.
And being around, we talked a lot about when we discussed this book in our meetings, was kind of the idea of how much can we do outside of just the typical Sunday morning service, small group, those kind of things, which are key tenets in our church. But do we do life together? Do we share meals? So even one of the great examples that he brought up was, how often do we go to a kid's soccer game who goes to our church that isn't our own kid? Do we do those kind of things? Do we? And I'm sure some people in the Forestbrook community do. I know when I was young and played sports, I would see friends in the stands and all those kind of things. So I think that was to your point of we do some of the stuff well, but it's sort of the idea of we're around each other because we want to be around each other and we like each other. And sometimes that has to be a bit more um, loosely defined. So not just sitting in the pews on Sunday morning, but we're doing stuff together. We're having fun.
Yeah,
And then he also mentions that you want to become like those people.
yeah,
And a key thing that he mentions in the book that a resilient disciple has is that a resilient disciple walks into their church and sees all the people and thinks, this is my family. This
yeah,
is the people I want to be around for better, for worse kind of thing. And I think I think that if we do youth ministry well, that's how our young people should feel about our church, right? They want to be a part of it. They want to become like people that are in the church. And it would be so cool. And I know we do have this, but it'd be so cool if more of our young people could think about specific people in the church, or think about the church broadly and sort of say, this is what I want to be a part of now, and it's more what I
yeah.
want to become a part of going in the future. So I thought that was really cool when he laid that out, and it, again, sort of what we talked about in our last podcast. It gives us a blueprint of what kind of relationships we want to go after.
In some ways, I like to think of it. I mean, you just as you're talking about this brought up my this thought that it takes belonging to something deeper, right? It takes belonging to becoming, right? It's like, I don't just want to belong to this community. I want to become like the people here.
Yeah,
I love that. I love that that image.
yeah,
Um,
and I sorry, Jim, but I was even I was
no,
even thinking about the other day, kind of a funny anecdote, but my cousin, who both of us are Leaf fans, he's texting me and he's saying, like, this is a disaster. What are we going to do? We should probably just find another team to cheer for. And I responded back to him, in a weird way, like, I can't. Like, they're like my family. They're like, I can't do something else. I sort of just have to keep coming back. And like, I love them and I hate them all at the same time. And like, you have these mixed emotions. And I think a really healthy relationship with the church is sort of that idea of,
yeah,
it's tough at times. We're going to hit roadblocks. There's going to be relational issues. That's where there are people, there are problems, but
yeah,
you want that overall feeling of like, this is the tribe I belong to, for worse or for better. So I think that was sort of what they were driving home in the book, which I think is something that's really a positive feeling to have in life in all places, but especially in church.
And I'm sure we'll flesh this out a little bit more later, but this idea and notion that you have to be perfect in order to be involved is something that I don't think fits well in this, right? So people who
Yeah.
are listening, you don't have to be perfect in this, and we'll flesh that out some more. One of the things that I really loved, which he couches this as you listen to all these podcasts, is this idea of digital Babylon, right? And this landscape. This is the landscape. It's changed. We're hyper connected, fast paced, information at our fingertips, and I love what he talks about, that because that's the case with this generation and more, it's created this tension of mistrust, but also isolation, right? And I think there's so much to speak here, because this is actually the landscape where we're operating, right? And I'm old enough to remember a generation where leadership in the church and leadership in different organizations were selected, and you just kind of followed, right? It was like those were the people that you sort of just went in. And what they describe is that this generation no longer just accepts leadership, and in other words, leadership in some ways has to prove relevance to, if you're going to expect me to follow you, not necessarily what's in it for me, but does some of this stuff make sense? Are you actually wanting to be involved in my life? And again, like I think that is so key for what we're talking about here, because I think it's challenging us to change the way we do things, so that we're less program oriented and more, I think what he talks about is presence oriented, right? Like, we're not asking people to come to the church and be changed by what we do, but what we're saying is that true change comes over long periods of time, and true change comes over consistent presence in a person's life. And because that's the landscape of mistrust that this generation lives in, it's hard. And I think also that there's, because we're so hyper connected, it's created a bit of loneliness, because each one of us are on our devices, we're connecting, and while we're getting this information and we're getting sort of the neurons firing and getting whatever we want, what it's doing is it's keeping us farther and farther apart. And I think what I love about his approach is that there's some really important things that we could do, that where this could actually be an opportunity for some real growth in the church. And I want to get into that. So I want to know what you thought about that, and what some, as he starts talking about that, what were some of the things that you felt maybe were important things for us listening, for those listening, to say, okay, this is how we could enter that understanding.
Yeah, so I think he had some really kind of cool practical ideas of how do we intentionally strive after these meaningful relationships. And I think it's a great idea to just go through some of them, and even not just in a way to say here's what we should be doing as a church, but also to have everyone who's listening to the podcast think about, are there some ideas in their minds about how we could go forward as well. So one of the things he mentioned that I thought was really neat was having sort of some specific outcomes with our relationships that we're looking for, right? So a lot during this process, we talked about we do some things really well, but it's almost, and this is maybe a bit of an overgeneralization, but sometimes we do things well a little bit by an accident. But this would mean really being clear about what type of relationships do we want, and when will we know if we're seeing success, right? And so a couple of the ideas that he had in mind was that, youth could say clearly, I'm really confident in the relationships that I have at church. Like, is that something that all of our youth would say in a large number? Do I mentor someone, and does someone mentor me? Like, when we ask that question, is that something that, especially for a certain age, you'll be a mentee for a certain period of your life, but at a certain age, do you have someone that you go to for guidance in the church, and do you have someone that comes to you, right? That's it. That's a question that we can all ask ourselves and think, do I look for those opportunities? And then another thing, and this is specifically on intergenerational relationships, which we're talking about today, is, am I connected to multiple different groups at church, right? So do I have friends that are 20 years older than me? Do I have friends that are younger than me? Do I have friends that are my own age? Do I have diversity in who I'm connected to at the church? So that would be another sort of question of, if we're being specific about what type of relationships we're having, if we ask ourselves those questions, do we find, yeah, actually, I connect well with this person. They're not a contemporary of mine, but I really value that relationship. That would be a way that we could sort of think about it. So that was one cool one.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that as you're talking about youth being confident of their relationships in the church, I couldn't help but go back to this one thought that, especially with young people today, and I feel so old saying that, but but I think there's an element of, as human beings, we know where we feel welcome. You know, when we enter a place, we know there's a gut instinct almost of being genuine, or finding genuine connection where we feel welcome. And I want to highlight that word feeling, because I know that sometimes we're afraid of it, but I loved the emphasis that he put about how we assess the community that we have, and whether we're building an emotionally healthy space where people feel welcome, right? And so that's an intentional thing. And regardless of what our age might be, we have a lot to contribute to people in that generation of whether they feel welcome in that place or not, right? And I think I tie that to this thought. And as a pastor, this continues to challenge me, because it's very easy, as we were talking about earlier, about the mistrust idea, that it could be very well seen that as a person who works for the church, if I'm spending time with you, it could very well be this idea that, okay, well, you're spending time with me because you're paid to do that, right?
Right.
And so the idea that we, how genuine and vulnerable we are in terms of how we connect with people, and whether we really, really want and love these individuals are all factors that contribute to that. And again, it builds into this idea as well, right? That we're not just doing a program so that you can come here and feel like it takes up X number of hours in your week, but rather we're building something where we want these long-term relationships to be something that you're connected with and you feel welcome to, where you feel like as a whole human being, we care. We don't just care about your spiritual life, we care about your physical life, we care about your emotional life, your mental life, all of those elements, and regardless of what those circumstances are. And I think that was a big eye-opener, and I think it's quite an effort for change in our community to continue chasing after intentionally, right?
Yeah, I also think on top of the ability to make our youth group as emotionally sort of healthy as possible, and to me, I sort of heard that as him encouraging us that when young people in the church have a feeling about something, or they want to express it, that we're listening to them and listening to what their struggles are, right? And I think the other thing he highlighted as well is that the opposite exchange happened. So older people in the church can be honest about things that they struggle with, and they can talk to young people about it, and they can hear that dialogue going both ways. So there was an aspect of us being encouraged as sort of the like folks that are a bit older in the church, not that I'm overly old, but folks that are older in the church, that we're vulnerable with them, and when disagreements arise over issues that we're bound to have, that we're sort of sticking it around long enough so that we can sort out some of those disagreements, talk about it, hear each other. And so I think that's sort of something that goes back and forth. That's pretty cool. Yeah.
I was just going to say, you brought up an idea or a thought, and one of the reasons why I love worshiping at Forestbrook is when I see the multitude of ages, right? So when I see when I see Bill Lyons, who's like 100 years now, right, 100 years old, and he's worshiping, and I see other young people there, and I think here's the spectrum. The incredible gift to the church is for young people to look at people who are older and say, you know what, my faith can actually be, there's longevity in faith, right? And so I think that modeling and just what you were saying is so key in all that we do, right? So
for sure. So there's just three more ones that I just want to touch on that I have written down from the book of sort of practical things, and before we get to our guest for today. But the one thing about digital Babylon that comes out a lot is about our technology. And I think technology is sort of like this double-edged sword for us, right? There's so many benefits. And if you think about now as a church, how would we have gone on in this pandemic if it weren't for YouTube, if it weren't for all of the emails, if it, so it's a real asset to us. But we also think as a youth group, one of the ways that we could try to work on some of the relational stuff is find places where screens aren't welcome, and not just not welcome for the youth, because often, you hear this thing where it's like, hey, youth, bring in all your phones and we're putting them away for the weekend. But then the adults, we're going to go back to our room and we're going to text our wives and we're going to do whatever we want. But it's like, we all have issues with screens. We all have issues with this. So do we find places and permission for when we can put them away? Because you always hear these stories, right? People put their phone away for the day and they're like, I couldn't do it. Then they do it and they loved it. So how can we look for opportunities to do that? And I think that would be fun, because even though technology offers us so many amazing things that we haven't had at our disposal, it also can inhibit some of our connection relationally. And I think if we're all being honest with ourselves, we can think of those periods where technology isn't helping our interactions with one another. And then two other things that he brought up in the book that I thought were kind of cool that we could think about as a church of how do we develop more people to fill these roles in people's lives was, one was faith champions, which I thought was a cool term, which was the idea of an older adult in a young person's life who isn't their parent, who they like and they respect and they get on with. But, you know this, Jim, as a parent, sometimes kids don't want to hear it from you, but they'll hear it from someone else. And those people can, and I've had plenty of people like that in my life, two on this podcast today, that can really pass on, things to you as a young person that probably your parents said to you before, but you're like, don't want to hear it. So that's a cool idea of like,
when it comes from someone else, right?
Yeah, it's far more original if it's not your mom or dad. So that's and it is kind of, and I think parents love that too, right? Because they say like, I've been telling them that, I've been telling them that, I've been telling them that. And then you could sort of say, yeah, I know you've been telling them that, but maybe, the wrong way or whatever. So that's one cool thing that, if you're listening to this podcast, is there someone in the church that, that you could be that person for them? Like that would be really neat. And the other thing was having a mentor. So 56% of resilient disciples say that they often look to those who are older than me for advice when they're making a difficult decision. So that's over half of a resilient disciple, the type of disciples we want at Forest Brook, who would say that they reach out to someone older for help and guidance, which is kind of neat. And I think, Jim, I remember even when I was in youth, we tried to think about ways to bring about those sort of mentor-mentee relationships. I know sometimes, how that's done is tough. We even talked about that as a group. Do you just start matching people up, or you start assigning people? But hopefully if we develop the type of church where we're relationally strong, that stuff comes naturally, right? So, but we also do want to think about ways that we can encourage more people to want someone in their life that they can look to, and also someone who's willing to play that role for someone. So, and those are sort of lifelong relationships that can be really cool.
Yeah, I love that summary. I think it's there's so many things there, and much more obviously, that we as a community could benefit from, right? And well, I guess at this point we could introduce our guest for the evening, who really doesn't need much of an introduction.
And Jim, I did tease in our first podcast that
That's true.
we were having the mascot of the youth group
That's
joining
right.
us. And I think the reason I think that Gary's the mascot is because I think a mascot has
So our guest is Gary. Our guest is
Gary.
Gary Cameron.
Here he
Yes.
is, Gary Cameron.
Here he is, Gary Cameron. Yay, Gary. You're on mute, by the way. But
The reason the reason that I've nominated Gary as the mascot of the youth group is I think a mascot's got to be two things. Noticeable, which Gary hits. You know, he's tall. He's a
I guess
big
I can't
guy.
hide.
You
Yeah.
can't hide. You walk in the room and you're like, there he is. There's Gary. He's sticking out like a sore thumb. He's sticking out like the Blue Jay dancing on top of the dugout.
Usually the oldest guy in the room.
Exactly. But then you've also got the key ingredient, which is that he is always there, present. So you're never going to go to a Blue Jays game and that bird's not going to be there. You're never going to go to a Leaf game and Carlton, the Bear's not going to be there. You're never going to come to a youth event and Gary's not going to be there. So welcome to our podcast, Gary.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, no worries. Well, Gary, just as we get into this, I want to ask you just briefly, what's your, give us your background of youth ministry at Forest Brook, and just maybe one or two like highlights of this journey.
Yeah, I guess my youth ministry, my start in youth ministry was accidental. It was back in a long time ago, probably 2005. There was a parent in the church, their son had just started playing golf, and the parent didn't play golf, and someone must have said, well, Gary plays golf, maybe he'll take your son out and play golf. And that was kind of where it started. I went out, started playing golf with these grade 7, grade 8 kids, and had a great time, and they had a great time, and we built some relationship through that. And if I move on maybe a year after that, there was a year where we had no youth pastor. It was just before Jim started, and there was a youth retreat coming up, and there was one Sunday morning they asked for volunteers for this youth retreat, and this parent kind of nudged me in the ribs and said, you could do that. And I'm like, I really didn't give it two thoughts, and I volunteered. And then maybe a Tuesday evening I got this phone call to say, can you be at the church at 5:00 on Friday? And I was like, why? Where are we going? Like, what's happening at 5:00 on Friday? And I didn't know that a retreat was for a weekend. And there I was, like, thrown into this retreat with, I can't remember how many youth, 60, 70, 80 youth on this Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And that was it. That was the start of youth for me. And within 6 months I was doing youth small groups, and I think I was going to Jamaica on a mission trip, and the kind of rest is history. I kind of accidentally volunteered one day and kind of jumped in the deep end, and it's been one of the greatest things that's happened to me. But there was no great planning or anything went into it. There was no real intention. I just had my heart pushed me to volunteer, and that was the start.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, Gary. I'm one of the grade 7 or 8 guys that was golfing with Gary at that time. We all stuffed our cars into his sports car that didn't fit the clubs really. Do you remember, Gary? We had to take the drivers out, and then I had to sit in the back, and all the drivers were on me. But we got up there. We got up to Uxbridge and played.
Yeah, it was miraculous. Cool. It was miraculous. And that started, it started something, for me. And I've been doing, youth small groups at Forest Brook, since then. So that's like 15 years, 16 years. And I don't think I've really missed a year since. I think there was one year I tried to sit out, and then by Christmas I was like, I can't do this. I have to volunteer. And I ended up in doing small groups again. And, with the mission trips, I've only missed, maybe a handful over that time as well. And youth has really been a huge chunk of my life. Since then, is something that has given me a real purpose, to my life. And it's been a real blessing to me.
So when we decided to have you on, one of the things that I was thinking about would be a cool thing to ask you, and maybe helpful for people in the church like me and other people who are currently involved in youth ministry, is I think one of your real gifts is that you've been able to translate youth relationships that probably started as you were giving most into that relationship, and it was a, a mentor relationship or a leader and, youth relationship, and you've been able to turn many of those relationships into friendships as adults, right? So I've really enjoyed that about our relationship. It started, you were my youth leader, and then now I consider you a good friend, and we still hang out quite a bit and enjoy each other's company. So what would you say is sort of the key to translating those relationships after the youth, move on?
I think for me, it's like it's being consistent, it's being present in the person's life. And like I'm kind of, I enjoy friendships, but when I get to know someone, I want to continue that, that friendship. And I don't really look on. I've always looked on youth as friends. I've never looked on them as anything different. Like so for me, it's been easy to kind of continue post youth into, to young adulthood and beyond. Like I try to be there and still check in on people and, and hang out with them, when the opportunity comes, whether it's, watching a Leafs game together, or whether it's, still playing golf, or whether it's, doing a multitude of other activities that I enjoy doing from times. It's just continuing the relationships through those things.
Cool. Yeah. So the other question I was going to have was, why do you think intergenerational relationships are important? What do you learn from surrounding yourself with young people in the church?
I think there's several different pieces, to it. I think, for me, any healthy family and, community church is one that has people of different age groups. So if you just have a church that is all people that are 60 plus, it's not healthy. But at the same time, if you just have young people, there's no one to kind of guide them through life.
Right.
And it's something that I've been intentional with with the young people that I've kind of got to know, is to try and encourage them to continue to be part of the community and want to be there. So it's not a place that's just their parents family, their parents community.
Right.
And they actually want to make it theirs as well, so they can have relationships with other people other than their parents. So it becomes their own community, not just their parents' community.
Yeah.
And I think there was a period where we had a lot of young people coming through youth, and we didn't really have a sort of young adults piece to it as well. So a few of us, including Jim, kind of got involved in trying to ensure there was somewhere for these young people to go after youth. And that was something that was really on our hearts, that we didn't want to lose these young people out of the community. So we tried to bridge the gap into making some relationships sort of past that. And as I think about youth and our church now, like one of the things that gives me the greatest satisfaction is seeing people like you, Andrew, and Brian and Josh, and a whole bunch of others that are feeding back into the next generation. And that for me is healthy, because if all the youth leaders are my age, it's not healthy. It's fine, but it's to have youth with people that are in the next stage of life. So they're now getting into careers and getting married and having kids, and be able to see that, not hear about it from people that are 20 and 30 years down line. I think is really healthy. But at the same time, that they can still see people like myself that are into their 50s, and still be able to relate to them, and still have a relationship with them, and still hang out with them, is good too.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've talked about a bit as a group is the idea that the one thing that people who are older in the church offer people who are younger in the church is a bit of pattern recognition, right? So if you've lived longer, you've seen more. And when you've seen more, you start to pick up what the deal is. And so even in your answer there, I'm thinking like if a youth asks one of us a question, I might have an answer based on, my additional 12 years of life over theirs. But then you'll have another answer that I'm not considering, in which add a bunch of other years of experience and living life and watching patterns repeat themselves over and over again that I'm not seeing too, right? So in a way, when you have those relationships that there's way more generations involved, you get such a deeper connection by getting those, different perspectives when you're having conversations about things, which I think is cool.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it earlier as well. Like sometimes, young people don't want to listen to their parents. They don't want to hear a message from their parents, and having people that are potentially their parents' age or even they're even older, probably give the similar message, but in a probably a softer way.
Yeah.
Or they're more willing to listen. So I think that is good. But it does take some effort. Like you've got to build up the relationship with the young person. Like you can't really speak easily into someone's life unless they trust you.
Yeah.
So you've kind of got to build up that relationship over time, and it can be through sports, whatever interest you have is trying to build a relationship out of that, and not out of I'm older than you got to listen to me kind of thing. They'll listen to you because they trust you as as someone that they value.
Yeah.
Let me touch on what you just said, Garrett, because I think that's a huge value. If you were to think of some simple ways that people could actually connect, like outside of an organized ministry, and I know this is like really kind of pie in the sky type of thing, but what would you recommend? Like, how would you recommend that in terms of that building of the trust and kind of thing?
There's lots of different ways to do. I mean, it's for me, it's like I've often taken a lot of the interests that I have, which have been around sports, and you'd be surprised sometimes how easy it is. Like if some people that play golf, invite them to play golf. But if you want to go out for a bike ride, you'd be surprised sometimes if you just ask some people that are younger to go on a bike ride with you. You'd be like, sure, why not? Or often it's like watch a hockey game, watch a basketball game. Just invite a few people around to your house, and just watch the game, hang out, have some fun, eat some snacks. You'd be surprised in the relationships that that can build up through that. Pre-COVID, I would often just have a bunch of guys around. We just play cards or play some other games, and it's like these are the sorts of times that you can just build up a relationship with someone, and then they see you as a person that has faith, and you can start to speak other things into their lives other than just hanging out and having fun together. You kind of got to build up that that relationship and that trust, and then you get a chance to mentor, and you get when they have challenges or things that come up in their life and they want some they're looking for some advice or guidance. You're the person they go to because they build up some relationship with you, and they trust you. But it really can be quite simple. Like it's there's no, for me, it's like I'm not special in any way. Like it's being available and just being willing and to build relationship with people. And it does, you've got to want to be vulnerable. Like a lot of the young people that I've gotten to know over the years, like they know a fair bit about me. Like I don't hide my life from them. It's like if you're going to build a relationship with someone, it's two-way. Like if you're going to mentor someone or get the opportunity to mentor someone, like they've got to know you. It's like otherwise you're coaching them. You're not letting them into your life. You're just coaching them in something specific. Like mentoring is a two-way relationship, and it takes a level of vulnerability.
And I think the other thing about what you're saying too that's neat is all the things you said that you're going to do anyway. You're going to go for a bike ride. You're going to go for a hike. You're going to go for a kayak. you're going to do that stuff no matter what. It's just as simple as inviting someone to do it with you, right? So you're not reinventing the wheel with some really snazzy idea to get some youth to come and do something with you. You go by yourself if they said no. So it and we can all think of things in our lives. Some things aren't conducive to that, obviously, but like a lot of things are. It doesn't hurt just to say like, hey, want to do this with me? And like I'm with you. I'm sometimes surprised when you ask people outside of their comfort zone say, yeah, sure. Like we have the run club at the church, and one time me and Brian said at small group one night, like, you guys want to come to the run club? And I think like 90% of them showed up, and like they probably hated it. They just walked and like whatever, like they didn't enjoy the activity per se, but they came because they wanted to come, right? So it doesn't take much to invite someone.
There's a few times I've got a bunch of the young people to like a charity run, and it's like most of them don't even really like running, but if you invite them and it's a good cause and they're like, and you give them a bit of encouragement, you'll get them there. And maybe there's the bribery of having breakfast together afterwards, or whatever. But it's like you'd be surprised if you actually ask what the response will be.
Yeah,
I love the intentionality behind that, because I think it's like you said, to touch on the vulnerability. It's not just having somebody doing stuff with you, it's intentionally entering somebody's life, allowing them to enter your own. And one of the things that I'm hoping we will do moving forward in the future are creating more opportunities where these connections can happen, right? So it's not necessarily programmed per se, where it's like, okay, on this night we're doing this or whatever, but to maybe have multiple things where, because some people are not going to come for that run, but others might do something else, right? And then to actually have those populated with people for whom are willing and ready to enter into those relationships with our young people, because I think that's the beginning of forging these meaningful, intergenerational relationships. And so, Gary, I got one more question for you, at least officially, that is, and to someone who's listening right now that might think, I have nothing to offer, right? They might be sitting there thinking and listening to this, which we're grateful for. What would you say to that in light of what we just talked about?
I think they'd be surprised. Like I think everyone has something to give, and I think it's it's reaching. It's really reaching out. I think this piece of you just got to if there's youth and young people around you, or and families around you that you're connected with, is just ask how they're doing. Like just be interested in their lives. I think we live in a world at the moment where it's like it's easy for people to live in isolation, and I think if you pay an interest in people's lives and possibly ask them to do things, or to go for a bike ride, or to go for a walk, or lots of very simple things. I think you'd be surprised. Like I'm continually shocked by how willing people are to spend time with other people when you actually ask them. And to get like the number of times that I've had really weird groups of people together because I'll ask them. I forget how old people are. Like I completely like it. I've been doing youth for so long now. I cannot remember how old like a lot of the young people are. Like whether they're 29 or 27 or 25. And the amount of times I can get a group of people together that goes everything from like 16 to 29, and I don't think it's weird at all. Like for me, it's just normal because I know each of the people individually. But I think for some of the people that are there, it's like, wow, it's like there wouldn't be people that they would normally hang out with. They're people I would normally hang out with because individually I hang out with each of them. So it's like I think you can be surprised how easy it is to get people to to spend time together, and enjoy that time together, without doing anything particularly fantastic.
Yeah, I think, and just because I think about my relationship with Gary and the mentor he was to me, and I think the cool thing about what he's communicating today is that I can't think of a time where Gary scolded me or told me the 1, 2, 3 about how I should live life, or gave me his principles, or so on and so forth. But what's so cool about it is that when he invites me to do life with him, I notice how he treats the person who, the cashier at the golf club. I notice how he treats people everywhere we go. I notice what happens when something doesn't go right for Gary. How does he respond to that thing? So in a way, when you do life with someone, especially a young person, you're showing them the way by doing it, not by saying it. And I think, especially for young people, and back to what you were saying off the top, Jim, about earning that trust, it means way more to me to say, I've seen Gary do X, Y, and Z, as opposed to say, Gary says do X, Y, and Z. That's more meaningful to me. And the more opportunity I had to be invited into his world and watch it, the more opportunity there is for me to see it, right?
And I mean that I appreciate you saying that, Andrew. And it is, it's something that, as a mentor, if you want to put it in a term, like you have to model what you're trying to teach, or you want to disciple the younger person to do, but you can't. You have to model it naturally. You can't, as you see, you can't just tell people how to do things. You've actually got to do it yourself. Like if you, and I think, I think one of the important things as well is, like, if there's areas of your life that you're kind of struggling with, is like, admit it.
Yeah.
Like, and it's, you don't have to be perfect. I think that's also, something that, for people that, you're saying, can anyone do this? It's like, you don't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
Because there's no, none of us are perfect. We're all pretty good in some things, but we're terrible in other things. It's we're all a work in progress.
And Jim, we've talked a lot about digital Babylon, but I think what Gary's proving is that if you want our young people to survive in digital Babylon, you got to go into it with them, right? That's what Gary's saying. He's not saying he did this stuff on Sunday or at small group. He went,
I heard much program stuff,
right?
There.
But he went into digital Babylon with them, lived life in the world with people who weren't like him, and so on and so forth. And so I think that's what's really cool, is he does life with young people, which is important.
Well, the truth is, I think, what I've heard, and I think people will be challenged by some of the things that they've heard, and as they've been listening to these podcasts, is that we're all thrust into digital Babylon, right? And so, but we're also being called to live a certain way that challenges some of those things. It doesn't mean that we become citizens of digital Babylon and give into those ways, but that we're being called to a better way. And then specifically for this, what we're talking about, it's these relationships are precisely that, right? The reason they're meaningful is because there's a give and take, there's a modeling, there's a pouring into, there's an authenticity to it that we're bringing ourselves to. And I think I love that we're able to think through that and not be afraid to want to model what we want to do in the coming generations under that, right? And not just to think that because we do something at the church as a program that that does it, whereas I think what Gary, and I appreciate you sharing all of these things, and is that what you shared has a lot of it has taken place outside of the programming, right, of the church. And so I think those investments are huge. So yeah. Well, again, I just want to say thanks for joining us as the taking time out for in your schedule and coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is great. And I certainly hope that for those of you listening or watching, that as you're challenged by these things, as you think about some of the thoughts, think about one or two things that you may have heard that may have challenged you. Feel free to write some of those things in the comments below. Send us an email. We'd love to hear your thoughts. As we've said this before, we want this to be a conversation. And as we continue to bring guests who are relevant to the topics that we're talking about, we'd love to hear you interact with that. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you the next time.